I'm Rebecca Hayes, 32, sitting stone-faced in our family lawyer's mahogany-lined office, as my father Richard laughs mockingly. I've just signed away my $85 million inheritance, my share of the Hayes real estate empire built over 4 generations. My siblings, Charlotte and Adam, stare at me, mouths agape with confusion. Yet despite Dad's contempt, a strange calmness washes over me. The lawyer solemnly hands my father a sealed envelope. That smirk would vanish from his face once he read what I knew. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayals and finding your own path. Now, let's get into how I went from heiress to outcast and why I don't regret it for a second. The Hayes name has been synonymous with luxury real estate in Boston for nearly a century. My great-grandfather started with a single apartment building in the 1930s. My grandfather expanded into commercial properties in the 1962s, and my father, Richard, transformed everything into a billion-dollar empire spanning the East Coast. Our family estate in Massachusetts sprawled over 12 acres, with manicured gardens, a tennis court, and an indoor pool, the perfect showcase of our success. Growing up, I witnessed my father's business tactics firsthand. During Sunday dinners, he'd boast about how he'd outmaneuvered competitors, sometimes through methods that made my mother wince. "The weak get crushed," he'd say, carving into his roast beef. "That's business, kids. Remember that." When I was 10, I overheard him on the phone threatening to ruin someone financially if they didn't sell their property. He saw me listening and winked, as if sharing a special lesson. From an early age, the pressure to be worthy of the Hayes name suffocated me. While my friends worried about homework and crushes, I was being prepped to someday take a leadership role in Hayes Development Corporation. My father scheduled my life tennis lessons, not because I enjoyed the sport, but because deals get made on the court. Piano recitals, not because I loved music, but because cultural refinement impresses the right people. I showed signs of rebellion early. When I was 13, I started using my allowance to buy art supplies instead of the designer clothes my father approved of. I'd hide in my room for hours, painting landscapes and portraits. Once, my father found my sketchbook and flipped through it with a dismissive snort. "Cute hobby, Becky. Just don't let it distract you from what matters." My mother, Stephanie, played peacekeeper, always trying to smooth things over between my father and me. "Your father just wants what's best for you," she'd say after particularly heated argument. But I noticed how she'd avoid his gaze at dinner when he berated the household staff, how her hands would tremble slightly when he raised his voice. She never truly stood up to him, not once in 38 years of marriage. To the public, we were the perfect American success story, a close-knit family continuing a legacy of excellence. We graced the covers of business magazines and hosted charity events in our ballroom. Richard Hayes was a visionary, a philanthropist, a family man. Behind closed doors, our home felt cold and transactional. Hugs were rare. Praise even rarer unless it involved closing a deal or impressing the right people. Despite being the middle child, my younger brother Adam became the clear favorite once he hit his teens. He mirrored our father's mannerisms, repeated his catchphrases, and laughed at all his jokes. Though Adam lacked any real business instinct, his college grades were mediocre at best. My father began grooming him to take over. "He has the Hayes spirit," my father would announce proudly, while Adam basked in the attention. Meanwhile, my older sister Charlotte worked twice as hard to earn half the recognition. She graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, secured her MBA, and still our father questioned her decisions in company meetings. Charlotte channeled her frustration into perfectionism and competitive spite, particularly toward me. If I received an A on a report card, she'd remind everyone of her A+. If I won an award, she'd casually mention she'd won the same award years earlier. Every year, the Hayes Family Foundation hosted a lavish charity gala that attracted Boston's elite. The press coverage was immaculate, with photographers capturing Richard handing over enormous checks to various causes. What the photos didn't show was my father calculating exactly how much each donation would save in tax write-offs, or how he'd instruct the PR team to ensure the Hayes name appeared prominently on every press release. $5 million in donations gets us $20 million in good publicity and connections. he once explained to Adam, thinking I wasn't listening. By the time I turned 18, I knew I couldn't breathe in that world much longer. The question was whether I had the courage to walk away from everything I'd been raised to value wealth, status, and the Hayes legacy. Harvard Business School was non-negotiable in my father's eyes. 4 generations of Hayes executives have walked those halls. He reminded me as we toured the campus during my senior year of high school. I nodded obediently while silently noting the location of the fine arts building across campus. When my acceptance letter arrived, my father hosted a dinner party for 30 business associates to celebrate. No one asked if Harvard was where I actually wanted to go. During freshman orientation, while my assigned business mentor droned on about networking strategies, I slipped away to the art department. A student exhibition was in progress, and I stood mesmerized by the freedom expressed in each piece. A man in a paint-splattered shirt noticed me studying a particularly striking abstract. "What do you see in it?" he asked. I described the emotions the painting evoked, the tension, the release, the hidden story beneath the colors. He listened intently, then introduced himself as Professor James Sullivan, head of the Visual Arts program. "You have an artist's eye," he said. "Are you enrolled in any of our classes?" I explained my situation, expecting him to nod politely and move on. Instead, he handed me a course catalog. Sometimes the path others choose for us isn't the one that will bring us fulfillment. My office hours are Tuesdays at 4 if you want to talk more. 2 weeks later, I registered for my first art class as an elective. I told myself it was just to maintain my sanity amid the business courses. By midterm, I was spending more time on my art projects than my economics papers. Professor Sullivan recognized my conflict before I did. "Rebecca, talent can't stay buried forever," he said after class one day, examining my portfolio. "It finds its way out, one way or another. The question is whether you'll give it the respect it deserves." His words haunted me for weeks until I made a decision that would change everything. I switched my major from business to fine arts, keeping the change secret from my family. For nearly 2 years, I lived a double life, sending home reports about business classes while immersing myself in color theory, composition, and art history. The facade crumbled during Parents' Weekend of junior year. My father insisted on meeting my business professors and seeing my projects. I fabricated excuses, but he was relentless. Our confrontation happened at Harvest, an upscale restaurant in Harvard Square. "I spoke to Dean Miller today," my father said casually as our appetizers arrived. "Funny thing, he had no idea who you were." The blood drained from my face as he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "So I did some digging. Fine arts? Really, Rebecca? You've been lying to us for 2 years?" Charlotte, who had tagged along for the weekend, couldn't hide her smug satisfaction. "I told you something was off, Dad. She never talks about her business courses when I ask." "I'm not changing my mind," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite my racing heart. "I'm good at this, Dad. Really good." Richard Hayes didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply placed his napkin on the table, signaled for the check, and said, "You have until Monday to change your major back, or you're cut off. Tuition, housing allowance, everything. Your choice." He walked out, Charlotte trailing behind after throwing me a look that mixed pity with triumph. I sat alone at the table, shaking but somehow relieved. The secret was out. The choice was clear. I didn't change my major. On Monday, my meal card stopped working. By Wednesday, I received notice that my tuition payment had been withdrawn. By Friday, I had to leave my apartment because the rent check bounced. For the remainder of my college career, I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a cafe, evening receptionist at a gallery, and weekend portrait commissions for tourists in Harvard Square. I moved into a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, ate ramen most nights, and used art supplies so cheap they sometimes fell apart in my hands. Charlotte's support came in the form of weekly calls where she'd detail everything I was missing at home, always ending with, "Dad might forgive you if you just apologized and came to your senses." Meanwhile, she reported my every move back to our father, including the small exhibition I participated in during senior year. Adam's response to the family drama was avoidance. He called once, awkwardly offering to put in a good word if I would just stop being so stubborn. When I refused, he sighed and said, "I don't get why you're doing this to yourself, Becky. Life could be so easy." Easy wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted authentic. I graduated with honors, my senior thesis earning recognition from several prominent galleries. The ceremony was packed with proud families, clutching bouquets and taking photos. My section of seats remained empty. No, Hayes showed up to see me walk across the stage, not even my mother, who had promised to try but texted last minute that your father needs me at a business function. That night, I sat on the steps of my apartment building, diploma in hand, feeling strangely free, despite everything. I had survived. I had proven to myself, if no one else, that Rebecca Hayes was more than just an heiress to a fortune. I was an artist, and I was just getting started. New York City's art scene swallowed me whole after graduation. I found a shoebox apartment in Brooklyn with a bathtub in the kitchen and a view of a brick wall. But the rent consumed most of my entry-level gallery assistant salary. My paintings piled up against the walls as rejection letters from exhibitions filled my inbox. Each night, I'd fall asleep wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. 6 months into this struggling artist existence, I stayed late at the gallery to finish installing a new exhibition. The owner, Megan Collins, returned unexpectedly and found me replacing one of her artist pieces with a different orientation. "What exactly are you doing with Jameson's work?" she asked, arms crossed. I froze. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins. The light hits it better from this angle. The shadows were obscuring the detail work on the lower quadrant before." Instead of firing me, she studied the painting silently for a full minute. "You're right. It's better this way." She tilted her head. "You have an eye. Are you an artist yourself?" The question felt like a trap, but I answered honestly. Yes. Contemporary realism with abstract elements. Bring your portfolio tomorrow. No promises, but I'll look. That night, I stayed up until dawn perfecting my portfolio. Megan reviewed it over lunch the next day, asking pointed questions about my technique and inspiration. 2 weeks later, she offered me a spot in a group show featuring emerging artists. The opening night exceeded all expectations. The gallery buzzed with collectors and critics, and to my shock, 3 of my 5 pieces sold before midnight. The most surprising development came the following morning when Megan called me into her office. "Someone wants your entire remaining collection. They're offering double the listed price." I nearly fell out of my chair. Who would do that? "They've asked to remain anonymous," Megan said. "But they'd like to meet you. Tonight, if possible." That evening, I arrived at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, expecting to meet some eccentric millionaire collector. Instead, sitting alone at a corner table was my grandmother, Catherine Hayes. "Rebecca, darling," she said, rising to embrace me. At 78, she remained elegant and sharp-eyed. "Don't look so shocked. Your talent should be recognized, especially by family." Catherine had always been a peripheral figure in my life, present at holidays and special events, but never particularly close. As the matriarch who had passed control of the company to my father decades earlier, she maintained her own separate life, traveling extensively and involving herself in the arts. "Why did you buy my work?" I asked after we ordered. "Is Dad putting you up to this?" She laughed, a genuine sound I rarely heard in our family. "Richard has no idea I'm here. He'd be furious if he knew." She reached across the table to take my hand. "I've been watching your journey from afar, Rebecca. You remind me of myself at your age." Over the next 3 hours, my grandmother revealed a side of herself and our family I'd never seen. In her youth, she'd studied fashion design, creating innovative patterns that her husband, my grandfather, dismissed as cute little drawings. When she suggested launching a Hayes fashion line, he patted her hand and told her to focus on planning their next charity ball. "I buried that part of myself," she admitted, convinced myself that supporting my husband's vision was enough. It wasn't. 2 days later, Catherine visited my tiny apartment, not even flinching at the bathtub in the kitchen. She studied my workspace, examined my paints, and flipped through my sketchbook. "You need better light," she declared. "An actual space to work." The next week, she helped me secure a proper studio in a building she partially owned. When I protested I couldn't afford it, She waved her hand. Consider it an investment in your career. The Hayes women need to stick together. For 6 months, Catherine became my secret supporter and confidant. She introduced me to collectors, arranged meetings with influential gallery owners, and most importantly, shared wisdom about navigating life as a Hayes who didn't fit the mold. Our arrangement remained private until Richard unexpectedly showed up at my first solo exhibition. He stood rigidly before my largest piece, face unreadable, then turned to find himself face to face with his mother. "Mother," he said coldly, "I wasn't aware you frequented these sorts of venues." "There's quite a lot you're not aware of, Richard," she replied evenly. I watched their standoff from across the room, heart pounding as my father leaned in to whisper something. Catherine's spine straightened, but her expression remained calm as she whispered back. Whatever she said made my father's face flush deep red. Later that night, Catherine called to warn me. "Richard is threatening to remove me from the family trust if I continue supporting you. He says I'm undermining his authority. Grandma, please don't risk your security for me. I'll be fine." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "I'm 78 years old with more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes." Richard forgets who taught him how to play hardball. Her voice softened. "But be careful, Rebecca. Your father doesn't handle defiance well, especially from those he believes should be loyal to him." 2 weeks later, Catherine collapsed at a charity luncheon. The diagnosis was grim, advanced pancreatic cancer that had spread to her liver. Suddenly, the Hayes family had a crisis that even Richard's money couldn't fix. Despite Richard explicitly forbidding me to visit Catherine in the hospital, I went daily. The first time we crossed paths in the hallway, he glared but said nothing. By the third encounter, he'd resorted to having his assistant message me the visiting schedule so our paths wouldn't cross. Charlotte made a point of telling the nurses I wasn't immediate family whenever she could. Adam came once, looking uncomfortable, then never returned. Catherine's decline was rapid. During my visits, she drifted between lucidity and morphine-induced confusion. 2 weeks after her diagnosis, during a particularly clear moment, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "The safety deposit box," she whispered. "Boston First National. Keys in my apartment, hidden in the base of the blue vase in the entryway." I frowned. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" "Things you should know. Things I should have revealed years ago." Her eyes drifted closed. "The Hayes legacy isn't what Richard pretends it is." The next day, Catherine slipped into a coma. 3 days later, she was gone. The funeral was a Hayes production, elaborate floral arrangements, politicians and business leaders in attendance. Richard delivering a moving eulogy that painted Catherine as the perfect supportive matriarch. I sat in the back row, ignored by my family, wondering about the mysterious safety deposit box. After the reception, I slipped away to Catherine's apartment. The doorman recognized me and let me in without question. The blue vase stood exactly where it had always been. When I turned it over, the base detached, revealing a small key and a note in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you very angry." Boston First National's manager personally escorted me to the vault when I presented Catherine's documentation, naming me as authorized to access her box. Inside the safety deposit box, I found a leather portfolio containing dozens of documents, photographs, and letters dating back to the 1940 seconds. I spent the entire night in my hotel room, piecing together the disturbing history Catherine had preserved. The oldest documents revealed that my great-grandfather hadn't created his designs for the first Hayes buildings. He'd stolen them from his business partner, a Jewish architect who fled Europe during World War II. When the partner tried to claim credit, my great-grandfather threatened to report him to immigration authorities for supposed document irregularities. More recent papers showed that my grandfather had manipulated his brother, my great-uncle William, out of his rightful share of the company through a series of complex legal maneuvers when William suffered a nervous breakdown in the 1960 seconds. William had effectively been erased from the family history. Most shocking were the documents from the early 1990 seconds detailed records, showing how Richard had systematically deceived his own father, falsifying financial reports to show losses in certain divisions that were actually profitable. He'd used the fabricated crisis to convince my grandfather to sign over controlling interest years before he intended to retire. Within months of gaining control, these supposedly failing divisions suddenly became profitable again, just as Catherine had predicted they would in several worried letters to her husband that went unheeded. The final document was a copy of William's driver's license and the address of a retirement community in western Massachusetts. Finding my great-uncle wasn't difficult. At 86, William Hayes lived modestly in a small apartment, surrounded by books and jazz records. When I introduced myself, his eyes the same blue as my grandmother's widened in surprise. "Catherine's granddaughter," he said wonderingly. "She mentioned you were the artist in the family." He gestured to a small painting on his wall that I recognized as one of my pieces from the group show. "She sent me this last year." Over tea, William filled in the gaps. He'd been the creative force behind many of the Hayes architectural innovations, but his brother took credit while William battled depression. When William finally sought treatment and wanted to return, he discovered his ownership had been diluted to almost nothing through legal trickery he didn't have the resources to fight. "Your grandmother was the only one who stayed in touch," he said. "Monthly letters for 50 years. Small gifts at Christmas. She couldn't stand up to them openly. The prenuptial agreement would have left her with nothing, but she never abandoned me." "Why are you telling me all this now?" I asked, though I already suspected. William smiled sadly. "Catherine always said you were different, that you valued truth over wealth." He squeezed my hand. "I've made peace with the past, Rebecca. The question is, what will you do with this information?" I left William's apartment with more questions than answers. The Hayes fortune, the empire my father had leveraged to control us all, was built on fraud, deception, and stolen ideas. The perfect American success story was a carefully constructed lie. I knew I couldn't confront my father without more evidence. The documents provided a roadmap, but I needed current information to understand just how deep the corruption went. I needed to know if the pattern established by my ancestors continued under my father's leadership, and if it did, I needed to decide what responsibility I had to expose it. My first step was calling Megan Collins, who had connections throughout New York's business world thanks to her wealthy collector client. Over coffee in her Soho loft, I explained as much as I could without revealing everything. "I need to research some business matters discreetly," I said, "particularly real estate developments and potential irregularities." Megan studied me over her espresso cup. "This is about your family, isn't it?" When I hesitated, she waved dismissively. "You don't need to confirm. The art world runs on gossip, darling. I've heard things about Hayes development for years, but nothing concrete." She introduced me to a retired financial journalist who now specialized in corporate research for select clients. Derek Foster worked out of a cluttered office in the Flatiron District, walls covered with framed magazine covers featuring his investigative pieces. "Most people don't want to find what they're looking for," he warned after I outlined my needs. "Especially when it involves family." "I'm not most people," I replied. "And the Hayes family isn't most families." Derek's fee was steep, but Catherine had left me a modest inheritance just enough to fund this investigation. For the next 3 months, we meticulously traced the Hayes Development Corporation's financial web. Derek taught me how to read between the lines of annual reports, spot suspicious patterns in property acquisitions, and identify shell companies. The picture that emerged was disturbing. My father had created an elaborate network of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, hiding millions from tax authorities. Through these accounts, he funneled money that couldn't be explained by legitimate business operations. We uncovered a pattern of threats and intimidation against competitors and partners who stood in Richard's way. One small development company had been driven to bankruptcy after opposing a Hayes project, their financing mysteriously drying up after a lunch meeting with my father. Former employees who left on bad terms found themselves blacklisted throughout the industry. The most personal discovery came when Derek obtained records of a luxury condo purchased through one of the shell companies. The occupant was Jennifer Davis, Charlotte's best friend since college, and, apparently, my father's mistress for the past 3 years. The same period during which my mother had been battling depression, a fact Charlotte had smugly attributed to Mom finally realizing what a disappointment you've become. The pattern of bribes to city officials for building permits and zoning exceptions was perhaps the most legally damning. Derek found evidence of consulting fees paid to shell companies owned by the relatives of 3 different Boston City Council members who had approved controversial haze projects. "This is enough to interest federal prosecutors," Derek said as we reviewed our findings. "The tax evasion alone could—" "I need copies of everything," I interrupted. "Multiple copies, stored in different locations." As I gathered evidence, I realized I needed access to more recent internal documents. That opportunity came unexpectedly when Richard reached out through his assistant, inviting me to the family estate to discuss your future. I suspected a trap, but accepted anyway. Richard greeted me in his study with uncharacteristic warmth. "Rebecca, I've been reflecting since Mother's passing. Perhaps I've been too harsh." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "You're still a haze, after all." "What exactly are you proposing, Dad?" "A position in the company, Special Projects Director. You'd work directly with me, learn the aspects of the business that might interest you." He slid a contract across the desk. "The compensation package is generous." I scanned the document, noting the non-disclosure and non-compete clauses buried in the legal jargon. "I'll need time to review this." "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take the weekend. We can announce your return at next week's board meeting." The invitation gave me the perfect cover to visit the Hayes Development headquarters. During a tour with Charlotte, who had been assigned to show me the ropes, I excused myself to use the restroom nearest my father's office. When the hallway cleared, I slipped inside with the master key card I'd quietly taken from the receptionist's desk during lunch. Working quickly, I photographed documents from Richard's credenza and downloaded files from his computer using a flash drive programmed by Derek to bypass the basic security. I had just finished when I heard voices approaching. I barely managed to slip out the side door when Adam rounded the corner. He looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing on this floor?" "Charlotte said you were touring the marketing department." "Just getting a feel for the whole operation," I said casually. "Dad wants me to understand every aspect before I start." Adam's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Well, don't get too comfortable making decisions. Some of us have been here learning the business while you were playing with paintbrushes." I forced a smile. "Wouldn't dream of stepping on your toes, Adam." That night, I reviewed what I'd gathered. Among the files was evidence of environmental violations in the newest Hayes development, a luxury complex being built on formerly industrial land. The soil testing reports showed dangerous levels of contamination that had been concealed from regulators through falsified follow-up tests. After consulting with Derek, I anonymously sent the original reports to the Environmental Protection Agency and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. 3 days later, construction on the project was halted pending investigation. Richard called me immediately. "This is a minor setback," he said, voice tight with barely controlled anger. "But I find the timing interesting." "What timing, Dad?" "The EPA receiving those reports a week after your visit to headquarters." He paused. "If I discover anyone in my family is working against Hayes' interests, the consequences will be severe. Remember that, Rebecca." I almost believed I'd gotten away with it until Adam called the next day, his voice triumphant. "Found something interesting in your studio today when I dropped by to deliver your contract." My blood ran cold. "You broke into my studio?" "The door was open," he lied smoothly. "Imagine my surprise finding all those files about our company. Those notes about offshore accounts. Dad's going to be very interested." That evening, Richard, Charlotte, and Adam arrived unannounced at my apartment. Charlotte inspected the place with visible disgust while Adam smirked from the doorway. Richard remained standing, refusing my offer of a seat. "I gave you a chance to return to the fold," he said quietly. "This is how you repay my generosity? By investigating your own family? Someone needs to hold the Hayes name accountable," I replied, surprised by my steady voice. "Accountability?" Charlotte laughed. "That's rich coming from someone who abandoned her responsibilities to play artist." Adam chimed in. "We protected you, Becky. Kept your embarrassing rebellion quiet from the board and our partners. And you thank us by digging up dirt?" Richard silenced them both with a raised hand. His voice was ice when he spoke again. "You've made your choice. From this moment, you are no longer welcome in Hayes properties or offices. If you pursue this further, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure you regret it." As they left, Richard paused in the doorway. "One more thing. Good luck with your art career after I speak with every gallery owner and collector I know in New York." The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I had just declared war on one of the most powerful families in Boston, my own. 2 weeks after the confrontation in my apartment, I received an embossed invitation to the annual Hayes Foundation Charity Gala. The envelope was addressed in my mother's handwriting with a personal note. "Please come. Your father has calmed down. He wants to make peace." I doubted Richard Hayes had ever truly wanted peace with anyone, but the gala presented an opportunity I couldn't refuse. Hundreds of business leaders, politicians, and society figures would be present, the perfect audience for what I was planning. When I arrived at the Hayes Estate Ballroom in a borrowed designer gown, the reaction was immediate. Conversations halted, heads turned, and my father, in mid-conversation with the mayor, froze momentarily before composing himself. He crossed the room with practiced smoothness, air kissing my cheek for the benefit of onlookers. "Surprised you had the courage to show up," he murmured through his fixed smile. "I never turned down a formal invitation," I replied just as quietly, "especially one delivered by my mother." Richard's expression flickered. "Stephanie doesn't always understand the complexity of business disagreements. But since you're here, we might as well make the best of it." He raised his voice for nearby guests. "Everyone, a moment of your attention, please." The room quieted as Richard placed his arm around my shoulders in a show of paternal affection that made my skin crawl. "Many of you know my daughter Rebecca has been pursuing her artistic passions these past few years. Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce she'll be bringing her creative talents back to Hayes Development as our new Director of Special Projects." Applause filled the room while I maintained a practiced smile. Charlotte approached with 2 champagne flutes, handing one to me with a look that could curdle milk. "What game are you playing?" she whispered. "I learned from the best," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. For the remainder of the evening, I played along with the charade, accepting congratulations and engaging in the meaningless social banter I'd grown up mastering. All the while, I observed my father holding court, the perfect picture of business and philanthropic success. The media coverage the next day featured family photos and quotes about the reunited Hayes dynasty. Business journals speculated about the innovative directions the company might take with the return of the wayward artist's daughter. My father arranged a series of meetings to introduce me to key partners and projects. I used each opportunity to gather more information, quietly building my case while pretending to embrace my corporate role. Charlotte's jealousy simmered as Richard included me in high-level meetings that she had fought years to access. Adam vacillated between condescension and nervousness, uncertain of his position now that I appeared to be back in favor. My mother, meanwhile, seemed genuinely happy about the reconciliation. "I've prayed for this," she confided during lunch at her favorite restaurant. "The family whole again." I nearly told her everything then, about the fraud, the mistress, the decades of lies, but the hopeful look in her eyes stopped me. She had constructed her entire identity around being Richard Hayes' supportive wife. The truth would shatter her world, and I wasn't ready to do that without ensuring she would be protected in the aftermath. My chance to strike came during my review of the Riverside project, a massive development that Richard had personally shepherded through regulatory approvals. As Director of Special Projects, I had legitimate reason to request all environmental and safety documentation. What I found confirmed my suspicions. The site had significant contamination issues that had been concealed through falsified report. Using an anonymous email account created through multiple proxies, I sent the genuine testing data to the EPA, the Department of Environmental Health, and 2 journalists known for their environmental reporting. I included enough documentation to prove deliberate concealment, but was careful to remove anything that could trace back to me. 3 days later, federal officials showed up at the Hayes Development offices with a stop work order for the Riverside project. The company's stock dropped 15% by market close as news of the environmental violations spread. Richard was quoted in the Boston Globe calling the situation a minor technical issue that we're fully cooperating to resolve. Behind closed doors, he was livid. "Someone inside this company is sabotaging us," he raged during an emergency executive meeting. His eyes locked on mine across the conference table. Someone with access to confidential documents and a grudge. I met his gaze steadily. That describes dozens of current and former employees. Dad. Perhaps we should focus on fixing the actual environmental issues rather than hunting for scapegoats? Charlotte chimed in. Rebecca has a point. The press is watching us closely. We need to appear proactive and responsible. Her support surprised me until I realized she was simply positioning herself as the voice of reason compared to our father's barely contained fury. Classic Charlotte, always calculating the angle that would benefit her most. The EPA investigation expanded to include other Hayes properties. Each new discovery brought further stock devaluation and increased scrutiny from regulators and the media. Richard became increasingly paranoid, ordering IT to monitor employee emails and installing additional security cameras throughout headquarters. I maintained my innocent facade until Adam found the encrypted folder on my laptop during a company retreat. I had stepped away from my workstation momentarily, forgetting to lock my screen, a rookie mistake born of exhaustion after weeks of playing double agent. What's this? Adam called out, clicking on folders labeled with project names and dates. The encryption prevented him from seeing the contents, but the folder names were damning enough. I returned to find him, Charlotte, and Richard all staring at my screen. The look on my father's face confirmed that my cover was blown. My office. Now, Richard said, his voice deadly quiet. The confrontation that followed was ugly. Richard threw a crystal paperweight against the wall, barely missing my head. Charlotte called me a traitor while Adam stood smugly by the door, preventing my exit. You think you're so clever, Richard snarled. Did you really believe you could bring down what took generations to build? You're nothing, a failed artist playing at corporate espionage. I'm not trying to bring down the company, I countered. I'm trying to force it to operate ethically. Ethics? Richard laughed harshly. This is business, Rebecca. If you can't understand that, you really are as worthless as I always suspected. Charlotte stepped forward, her voice cold. You should have stayed in your little studio painting pretty pictures. Now you've forced our hand. Is that a threat? I asked. Richard straightened his tie, suddenly calm in a way that was more frightening than his rage. No, Rebecca. It's a promise. You've made yourself an enemy of this family. We protect our own, but you're no longer one of us. As they escorted me out of the building, security confiscating my company phone and laptop, I realized I had underestimated just how far my family would go to protect their empire of lies. The real battle was just beginning, and they had resources I couldn't match. But I had something they didn't, the truth, and I was prepared to use it. I knew my father would retaliate, but I underestimated the speed and scope of his vengeance. At 2:17 a.m., my phone rang with a call from the security company monitoring my art studio. By the time I arrived, the building was engulfed in flames, firefighters battling the blaze as I watched helplessly from behind police tape. Everything I'd created over the past 3 years, paintings, sketches, works in progress, reduced to ash and char. Electrical fire. The fire marshal informed me the next day. Looks like faulty wiring in the north wall. I knew better. The studio had been rewired just 6 months earlier during renovations. But proving arson would require evidence I didn't have. When I filed an insurance claim, the response came with suspicious promptness. Claim denied due to evidence of accelerants inconsistent with accidental causes. In insurance speak, they were accusing me of burning down my own studio for the payout. Someone had planted evidence to make it look like I'd committed fraud. Megan called the morning after the fire, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Rebecca, I need to be straight with you. Several major investors are pressuring me to end our professional relationship. Let me guess, Hayes Development investors? Her silence confirmed it. I'm sorry. You're talented, but I can't risk my entire gallery. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment to find the door ajar. Inside, every wall had been spray painted with a single word in red. Traitor. My computer was missing, along with my backup drives and files. Even the flash drive I'd hidden inside a hollowed-out art book was gone. The police took a report but didn't seem optimistic. No signs of forced entry, the officer noted. Any chance a friend or family member has your key? Friends began avoiding my calls. Connections in the art world suddenly had no time to meet. The few who did spoke in whispers, glancing nervously around as if being watched. One gallery owner finally admitted the truth over coffee. Richard Hayes is telling everyone you're unstable and vindictive. He's implying that helping you would be bad for business, anyone's business. I was being systematically isolated. My support network dismantled piece by piece. When I tried to buy groceries, my card was declined. A call to my bank confirmed my worst fears. I'm sorry, Miss Hayes, but your accounts have been frozen pending an investigation into suspected fraudulent activity, the bank representative explained. We received documentation from the Boston Police Department regarding possible embezzlement from Hayes Development Corporation. The falsified police report was a masterful touch impossible to resolve quickly, designed to leave me penniless while I fought to clear my name. I withdrew the last $200 from an ATM using my backup debit card before that account was inevitably frozen too. With nowhere else to turn, I called William, asking if I could stay with him for a few days. He agreed immediately, his voice grave as he warned, "Be careful coming here. Richard has resources everywhere." I was packing a small bag when my phone dinged with an email notification. The sender was anonymous, but the attachment made my blood run cold. Security camera footage from inside my studio the night of the fire. The timestamp showed 1:43 a.m., and the figure moving methodically around the space, pouring liquid from a container, was unmistakable. Charlotte, my own sister, had burned down my studio, destroyed years of my work, all to protect the family legacy and please our father. The final clip showed her placing something near the electrical panel, the evidence that would implicate me in insurance fraud. Before I could process this betrayal, my laptop screen suddenly went black. When it rebooted, all my files were gone. Documents, photos, emails, everything. A text message arrived from Adam. "Should have used better passwords, sis. Those files you've been collecting? All gone. Even your little insurance policy footage. Good luck proving anything now." I grabbed my phone and the emergency cash I kept hidden in a paint tube, then fled my apartment. On the subway platform, I checked my email on my phone only to discover my accounts had been compromised there too. Every message, every contact erased. I was alone, nearly broke, with no evidence, no allies, and a powerful family determined to destroy me. For the first time since this began, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe Richard was too powerful to fight. Maybe exposing the truth wasn't worth losing everything. That night, curled on William's guest bed, I sobbed until my throat was raw. My great-uncle sat beside me, paternal in a way Richard had never been, and listened as I poured out the whole story. "They've taken everything," I finished hoarsely. "My work, my money, my reputation. I have nothing left to fight with." William was quiet for a long moment. "You know, when your grandfather pushed me out, I considered exposing everything. I had evidence not enough, but some. I even drafted a letter to the Boston Globe. Why didn't you send it?" "Fear," he admitted. "Fear and a misplaced sense of family loyalty." I told myself protecting the Hayes name was more important than justice. He squeezed my hand. "I've regretted that decision every day for 50 years. His words stayed with me as I drifted into fitful sleep. When morning came, I awoke with a revelation. There was one place I hadn't checked, one backup they wouldn't know about. The day after discovering the safety deposit box, I had created digital copies of all Catherine's documents and stored them on an encrypted flash drive. Fearing exactly the kind of attack that had happened, I'd mailed the drive to myself at a post office box I'd rented under a different name, a precaution that had seemed paranoid at the time but now felt prophetic. The flash drive was still there, untouched. It wasn't everything, but it was a start proof of the historical pattern of fraud and deception that formed the foundation of the Hayes Empire. Combined with William's testimony, it might be enough to interest authorities. As I was leaving the post office, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it until a sudden instinct made me answer. "Rebecca Hayes?" A woman's voice, professional and direct. "Speaking. My name is Tara Wilson. I'm an investigative journalist with the Boston Investigator. I've been looking into Hayes development for quite some time, and I believe we might have mutual interests. Would you be willing to meet?" I hesitated, wondering if this was another trap. "How did you get this number?" "From Derek Foster. He said you might need an ally right about now. Derek, my research partner, who had gone silent after the studio fire, had sent help when I needed it most. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I'm interested, I said. But given recent events, I'll need some assurances. Understood. Derek mentioned you might be concerned about security. Rest assured, I've been investigating powerful people for 15 years. I know how to meet discreetly. We arranged to meet at a public library in Connecticut, neutral ground far from Boston. As I hung up, I realized I was trembling not from fear, but from a renewed sense of purpose. My family had taken almost everything from me, but they'd overlooked the most important thing: my determination to expose the truth. The Hayes Empire had declared war on me, using every weapon at their disposal. They thought they'd broken me, left me defenseless and discredited. What they failed to understand was that in stripping me of everything: my art, my resources, my reputation, they'd also freed me from any remaining loyalty or restraint. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. William's modest apartment became my war room. At 86, he approached our mission with the vigor of a man half his age, spreading documents across his dining table and connecting me with former business associates who had their own stories about Hayes Development's questionable practices. The key is building a coalition, he advised. Richard's power comes from isolating his opponents. Together, we're stronger. My meeting with Tara Wilson proved pivotal. Unlike the general business press that treated Richard Hayes with deference, Tara had built her career exposing corporate malfeasance. She arrived at our library meeting with a thumb drive containing 5 years of research into Hayes Development permit irregularities, suspicious property transfers, and testimonies from former employees who'd been silenced through aggressive non-disclosure agreements. I've been trying to crack this story for years, she explained, but I've never had enough solid evidence to get past legal review. Everyone's too afraid to go on record. I'm not afraid, I told her. Not anymore. Together, we created a secure communication system using encrypted messaging and burner phones. Tara introduced me to her trusted editor and the paper's legal team, who outlined exactly what we would need to publish a story that could withstand the inevitable legal onslaught from Hayes Development. Our first priority was securing the evidence. I made multiple copies of everything: Catherine's original documents, William's records, Tara's research, and my own findings, and stored them in various locations: a lawyer's office, a bank vault under Tara's name, an encrypted cloud server, and with trusted friends of William's who had their own reasons to see Richard Hayes held accountable. If anything happens to me, I instructed Tara, publish everything immediately. While Tara worked on the journalistic angle, I focused on building a case that would interest federal prosecutors. Derek Foster, emerging from his self-imposed silence, connected me with a former colleague now working for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC is always interested in cases involving publicly traded companies and potential securities fraud, Derek explained. Richard's methods of inflating company value while hiding liabilities could qualify. We met the SEC investigator at a coffee shop in New York. After reviewing a carefully selected portion of our evidence, she leaned back with a thoughtful expression. This is substantial, she admitted, especially the offshore accounts and the environmental cover-ups. Have you spoken with the EPA as well? They're next on our list, I confirmed. Move quickly, she advised. Once Hayes realizes you're talking to regulators, things will escalate. She was right. Within days of my meeting with the EPA's Enforcement Division, Richard launched a new offensive. A gossip column in the Boston Herald ran a piece questioning my mental stability, citing anonymous sources close to the family who expressed concern about my increasing paranoia and delusions of persecution. Charlotte gave an interview to a business magazine, presenting herself as the concerned sister. My family and I just want Rebecca to get the help she needs. The pressure of trying to live up to the Hayes name affected her deeply, and we blame ourselves for not seeing the signs earlier. Adam worked the social circuit, telling anyone who would listen that I had developed serious addiction issues during my bohemian artist phase. The narrative they created portrayed me as unstable, unreliable, and vindictive, hardly a credible whistleblower. William received a letter from Hayes Development's legal team, threatening to sue him for defamation if he continued to spread malicious falsehoods about the company and its executives. The implied threat was clear: stay silent or be ruined. Rather than intimidating us, these attacks only confirmed we were making progress. As William put it, they wouldn't be fighting this hard if they weren't scared. Our coalition continued to grow. Tara found 2 former Hayes executives willing to provide statements about questionable business practices they'd witnessed. An environmental engineer who had been fired after questioning the Riverside project test results came forward with copies of the original contamination reports. Even Jennifer Davis, my father's mistress, contacted me after Charlotte vindictively exposed her affair to my mother. Richard promised to leave his wife for years. Jennifer explained during our cautious meeting at a diner outside Boston. When your mother finally discovered the truth, he blamed me entirely, said I had pursued him aggressively and threatened to ruin my reputation if I contradicted him. She slid a USB drive across the table. Text messages, emails, records of the condo payments. Use them however you need to. With each new piece of evidence, each new ally, the case against Hayes Development solidified. The SEC investigation progressed from preliminary to formal. The EPA expanded their probe to include multiple Hayes properties. The IRS began examining the offshore accounts Derek had uncovered. Richard, sensing the walls closing in, made one last attempt to neutralize me. His lawyer contacted mine with a settlement offer: $5 million and a public retraction of my accusations in exchange for signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I declined without hesitation. 2 days later, William and I were having breakfast when his phone rang. The caller was a former Hayes board member who had resigned years earlier after disagreements with Richard. You need to be careful, he warned. I still have contacts inside the company. Richard called a private meeting with his security team yesterday. I don't know exactly what was discussed, but he's desperate. Desperate men do desperate things. We increased security precautions immediately. I moved to a different location each week, using only cash and keeping my movements unpredictable. Tara accelerated her timeline for publishing the investigative piece. Our legal team prepared to file a comprehensive package of evidence with multiple federal agencies simultaneously. The night before our planned filing, I sat alone in a hotel room reviewing our strategy one final time. A text came through on my burner phone from Tara. It's done. Story goes live at 5 a.m. I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Despite everything, these were still my family members, people I had once loved and who I had once believed loved me. How had the pursuit of wealth and power corrupted them so completely that they would destroy their own daughter and sister to protect their empire of lies? With that thought still lingering, I drafted a letter to my father. Not a legal document or a list of accusations, but a personal message explaining why I had chosen this path and what I had hoped might have been different. I didn't expect it to change anything, but I needed him to understand this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth and accountability, the values the Hayes family had claimed to uphold while systematically violating them in practice. At dawn, I would deliver this letter personally, along with an offer. Sign over my rightful inheritance, the money that would have been mine as a Hayes heir to establish a foundation for victims of corporate fraud and environmental negligence. In exchange, I would request leniency in the sentencing recommendations if criminal charges were filed. It wasn't mercy exactly. Richard Hayes would still face consequences for his actions, but it was an acknowledgement of our shared blood. A final gesture of the family loyalty that he had never shown me. As I sealed the envelope, my phone buzzed with news alerts. The story had broken early. Tara Wilson's explosive exposé of Hayes Development's decades of fraud, environmental crimes, and tax evasion was already sending shockwaves through the business world. The Hayes empire was beginning to crumble. The question now was whether anything worthwhile could be salvaged from the ruins. The conference room at Brennan, Weiss, and Associates, neutral territory chosen by our respective legal teams, felt charged with tension as I waited. My attorney, Sandra Chen, arranged her documents meticulously, occasionally glancing at her watch. They're late, she observed. Power play. Making us wait. I nodded, touching the envelope containing my letter. After everything, Richard Hayes still couldn't resist asserting dominance through petty tactics. When they finally arrived 23 minutes late, the dynamic was immediately apparent. Richard entered first, immaculately dressed and expressionless. Charlotte followed, tight-lipped and pale. Adam trailed behind, visibly anxious, constantly checking his phone. My mother had declined to attend. Richard's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Holloway, who had represented the Hayes family for 30 years, spoke first. Let's be clear about the purpose of this meeting. We're here to discuss a settlement that will end this unfortunate family disagreement before more damage is done to the Hayes name. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Interesting characterization. The SEC, EPA, and IRS investigations aren't family disagreements, Mr. Holloway. They're responses to apparent criminal activity. Allegations, Holloway corrected smoothly. Unproven and potentially libelous allegations. The evidence speaks for itself, I interjected. But we're not here to debate that. We're here because I've offered a path forward that might salvage something from this situation. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that my words had registered. Charlotte studied her manicure with forced casualness while Adam shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My attorney outlined my proposal. I would formally relinquish any claim to the Hayes fortune, an inheritance valued at approximately $85 million based on company valuations before the scandal broke. In exchange, that same amount would be transferred to establish the Catherine Hayes Foundation for Corporate Accountability and Environmental Restoration. The foundation would operate independently, focused on helping communities and individuals harmed by corporate malfeasance. Additionally, Sandra continued, if criminal charges are filed, Rebecca would be willing to recommend leniency in sentencing, provided full cooperation with authorities and significant restitution to affected parties. Holloway leaned over to whisper something to Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. This is blackmail, Charlotte suddenly burst out. She exposes private family matters to the world, destroys our reputation, and now demands control of nearly $100 million? I won't be controlling anything, I clarified. The foundation would have an independent board. I'd have no access to the funds. How convenient, she sneered. You get to play the hero while we lose everything. No one has to lose everything, I said quietly. That's the point of this offer. Adam, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. What about the company? The employees who depend on Hayes Development for their livelihoods? It was the first legitimate concern I'd heard from any of them, and it surprised me coming from Adam. The company can survive with new leadership and transparent business practices. The foundation could even help with the transition. Richard, who had yet to speak directly to me, finally broke his silence. You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Rebecca, even as a child. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but this performance surpasses anything I could have imagined. Bravo. This isn't a performance, Dad. No, he smiled thinly. The righteous whistleblower sacrificing her fortune for the greater good? The prodigal daughter returning to save the family from itself? It reads like bad fiction. Richard Holloway cautioned, perhaps we should discuss the offer privately before. There's nothing to discuss, Richard interrupted. The offer is absurd. We've built this company through 4 generations of hard work and strategic vision. I won't let it be dismantled by a resentful child throwing a tantrum because she didn't get the attention she wanted. I had expected resistance, even rejection, but his complete dismissal of reality still stung. This isn't about attention. It's about crimes, real crimes with real victims. People whose water was contaminated. Investors who were defrauded. Family members who were cheated out of their rightful shares. Spare me the righteousness, he scoffed. You think I don't know what this is really about? You failed at your little art career and couldn't handle it. This is revenge, pure and simple. Mr. Hayes, Sandra interjected firmly. The evidence has been submitted to multiple federal agencies. The Boston investigator's story has been picked up by national media. This meeting isn't about whether there will be consequences that ship has sailed. It's about whether you want a say in what those consequences look like. Charlotte leaned forward. What exactly do you want, Rebecca? Just tell us. I want accountability, I answered honestly. I want the truth acknowledged. I want the people who were harmed to be made whole. And if we refuse? Adam asked. Sandra answered before I could. Then, the investigations proceed without any mitigating input from Rebecca. The prosecutors will determine charges based solely on the evidence, which is substantial. Richard suddenly laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You know what I find truly amusing? You actually believe you've won. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate slowness. Holloway, prepare the inheritance renunciation documents. If my daughter wants to walk away from her birthright, who am I to stop her? His confidence unsettled me. It was as if he still held cards I couldn't see. You're making a mistake, I said. This offer won't be available once formal charges are filed. Richard smiled the same cold smile I'd seen countless times when he believed he had outmaneuvered someone. Have the papers ready this afternoon. We'll sign. And then Rebecca can go play philanthropist with money she never earned. 2 hours later, we reconvened in the same conference room. Holloway presented the documents, releasing me from any claim to the Hayes estate or business interests. My attorney had reviewed every word, ensuring there were no hidden clauses or traps. I signed each page methodically, feeling strangely detached from the fortune I was giving away. When I reached the final page, I paused and looked directly at my father. I have something for you, I said, sliding the sealed envelope across the table. A letter I'd like you to read. Richard glanced at it dismissively. More accusations? Just read it, please. He took the envelope reluctantly and broke the seal while I signed the final document. As he began to read, I noticed a subtle change in his expression. First confusion, then disbelief. My letter wasn't what he expected. It contained no threats or recriminations. Instead, it explained how the evidence I'd gathered had already been provided to authorities weeks ago, long before this meeting. It detailed the establishment of the Catherine Hayes Foundation, using my personal artist sales proceeds and William's modest savings as seed funding, not dependent on the $85 million I was renouncing today. Most importantly, it explained why I had chosen this path. Asterisk. The inheritance I'm giving up today isn't just money, it's freedom from the toxic legacy that has defined our family for generations. Grandmother Catherine's dying wish wasn't for me to expose the family secrets. It was for me to break the cycle of deception and greed that has poisoned every relationship we've ever had. Asterisk. Asterisk. The foundation bearing her name will help those who suffered from the Hayes family's pursuit of profit at any cost, but its greater purpose is to stand as testament to what our legacy could have been if we had chosen integrity over wealth, compassion over power. Asterisk. Asterisk. I didn't do this for revenge, Dad. I did it because someone needed to tell the truth, not just to the world, but to ourselves. We weren't a successful family business. We were a successful business that destroyed our family. Asterisk. Asterisk. When you told me the weak get crushed, I believed you. I spent years trying to be strong the way you defined it, ruthless, unyielding, seeing people as either assets or obstacles. It took losing everything to realize that true strength comes from standing for something greater than yourself, even when it costs you everything. Asterisk. Asterisk. I hope someday you'll understand that this was the only way to save what really matters, not the Hayes fortune, but the Hayes soul. Asterisk. Richard's face drained of color as he read. For the first time in my life, I saw my father's carefully constructed mask of control completely shatter. He looked up from the letter, eyes wide with the sudden realization that he had completely misunderstood what was happening. You all ready? He began. Yes, I confirmed quietly. The authorities have had everything for weeks. Today wasn't about leveraging the evidence for a deal. It was about giving you one last chance to do the right thing voluntarily. Charlotte snatched the letter from Richard's hands and scanned it, her expression morphing from confusion to horror. The foundation already exists? Then what was all this about? She gestured wildly at the signed documents. Closure, I said simply. And choice. I wanted you all to have the opportunity to be part of the solution. This is insanity, Adam blurted, finally grasping what was happening. You've destroyed everything for, what? Some misguided principle? I gathered my belongings and stood. Not destroyed. Transformed. The Hayes name can still mean something positive in the world, just not the way you envisioned. Richard remained frozen, the implications sinking in. The meeting he had approached with such smug confidence, believing he was simply humoring my naive attempt at leverage, had been something else entirely. The inheritance he had laughed at me for renouncing had never been my goal. The power he thought he still wielded had already been neutralized. "You planned this," he said finally, voice barely audible. "All of it. I learned from watching you, Dad. Strategic vision, remember?" As I turned to leave, Charlotte called after me, her voice cracking slightly. "Where will you go? What will you do now?" I paused at the door. "I'm teaching art to kids in underfunded schools. Turns out there's more satisfaction in helping someone find their voice than in silencing others to protect your own interests." In the months that followed, the Hayes empire faced the consequences of decades of wrongdoing. Richard was indicted on multiple charges, including tax evasion, securities fraud, and environmental violations. Charlotte and Adam, while not criminally charged, saw their professional reputations severely damaged. The company's stock plummeted, and a court-appointed management team was brought in to restructure operations. Meanwhile, the Catherine Hayes Foundation began its work. The first grant funded environmental cleanup in communities affected by Hayes development projects. The second established a legal aid program for whistleblowers facing corporate retaliation. William served as honorary chairman until his health declined, providing a living link to the values that should have guided the family business from the beginning. My mother eventually filed for divorce, finally finding her voice after decades of silence. We began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. As for me, I returned to my art and my teaching. Each day in the classroom reminded me that legacy isn't measured in dollars or buildings, but in the lives you touch and the truths you honor. The children I taught came from backgrounds where opportunities were scarce, but their creativity and resilience were boundless. Helping them find expression for their experiences brought me a fulfillment no inheritance could have provided. Sometimes I think about that moment in the lawyer's office, my father laughing as I signed away millions, believing I had lost. In reality, it was the moment I truly became free, not just from the Hayes fortune, but from the weight of pretending to be someone I never was. The most valuable inheritance isn't money or power. It's the courage to live authentically and stand for something that matters. That's the legacy I choose to build, one honest brushstroke at a time. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family expectations and your own integrity? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that their worth isn't measured by their bank account or family name. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes walking away from what others value is the first step toward discovering what's truly valuable. See you in the next video.